Now continuing our discussion regarding app components, broadcast receivers, as the name suggests, the broadcast receiver is basically a class that is responsible to allow the app to respond to system-wide broadcast. So, for example, the alarms, right? So there is this clock which keeps ticking inside your Android system, and whenever you decide to put an alarm for the morning, let's say for the morning at 6 a.m., then at 6 a.m. the system, Android system, it transmits or rather broadcasts an intent telling all the apps that it's 6 a.m., and whichever app is interested in receiving this broadcast, they receive it and then they go off, right? So in case of an alarm app, whenever you put an alarm, you basically tell the app that you want this app to go to start playing some music when it's 6 a.m. So when it is 6 a.m., the Android system broadcasts the information to all the apps in the system, and at 6 a.m. the alarm app decides to start playing the music because it has received the broadcast which it wanted to receive, right? So for any time interval, at any point in time, there is a broadcast which is getting broadcasted by the Android system, and at 6 a.m. broadcast, whenever it is received, the alarm app decides to play the music, and that's how you get your alarm, right? Content provider, it manages a shared set of app data that you can store. So this is basically to do with any kind of data that an app wants to store in itself, and tomorrow if you need the data from that app, then you can utilize the services of content providers. The content providers example would be Contacts app. So the app that you use to store the contact numbers of your friends, this app basically has content providers and content resolvers which enable other apps to pick such information. If you have observed, then you must have seen that a lot of apps, they want to invite your friends to the app that you are using right now, and at that point in time they basically pick up contacts from the contact app using the content provider, right? Now, like I said earlier, there is a lot of things which needs to be discussed in these four components, so don't think that we have done with these. What basically we are doing is we are basically following the path of the Android docs. So in Android docs, if you go through the Android docs, let me take you to them, to the Android docs, so that we are all on the same page in case you're also referring to Android docs as you're watching these videos. So we have these four components that we have briefly discussed, and activity, broadcast receiver, content providers, and these components are briefly discussed here. We will be discussing them at large in length when we will be coming over to these topics, which are the core components, core topics here, right? So as of now, we are here, app fundamentals, right? Going back to where we were. Yeah. So content providers and broadcast receivers and services are three components that we will be discussing in future at length. Of course, activities as well. Now let's talk about activating components. The activating components basically means that you need to activate components using some kind of facility that is available in Android. So let's say you want to display an activity to the user, then you need some kind of a component which is called intent. So you will be using intent to activate activity, broadcast receivers, and services, right? For content providers, you have to use content resolvers. I mentioned it in the previous slide, right? Now, intent, we have already discussed this a little bit. Messenger, you can consider it to be a messenger that requests an action from other components, whether the component belongs to your app or another app. If you remember, let me take you to the Android Studio. We had used an intent here. This intent was the intent object here, and we basically wanted to start another activity. This is display message activity, right? And that's when we created an intent object here and then provided it with some data and then started it using the start activity method here, right? So that's what we mean here. When you say that you want to start an activity, then you have to use an intent. Similarly for broadcast and services, we will see these examples later as and when they come up, right? So you can also use intent to send an email. So in our previous example which I showed you here, we were only sending it to another activity, but what if you want to send it to an email, right? What if you want to start an email activity, which is probably your Gmail or Yahoo Mail app which is residing in your phone? You want to open an activity of those apps. In that case also you will be using intent only. We will discuss this later. And you can also issue an intent to let the user pick a personal contact and have it returned to you, right? So you can also talk to your let's say your contact app, and you can issue an intent. Of course you can do it through content providers also, but you can also do it through an intent, right? So you can issue an intent, start an intent, and ask the intent to return the URI, universal resource identification. URI is basically an address that is given to anything that exists on internet. So URI will be returned for that contact. And for broadcast receivers, the intent simply defines the announcement being broadcast. Battery is low. So let's say your phone, Android phone, is going to give an announcement at every time there is a 15% battery left in your phone. At that point in time, that broadcast will be there. The broadcast will be done through an intent which will be sent by the system, Android system, to all the apps available in the phone. Now it is up to the apps to decide upon if they want to receive this intent, or let's say the broadcast, and then do anything that they want to do with that. So like for example, you must have seen if you're playing games, heavy games in your phones, and the battery goes less than 15%, then a lot of games, they tend to give you a message, a notification that you should stop playing this game or recharge your phone, start putting it on the charging cord, because the battery is low and you might have a bad experience of playing your game if the battery goes off, right? Content providers are activated using content resolvers. So you will be requiring content resolvers if you want to use the facility of content providers. Here are a couple of methods that are listed here. You can start an activity or give it something new to do by passing an intent to start. You have already seen this method, right? You can also use the start activity for result. If in our previous example, if you remember, we were just sending an intent from activity 1, main activity, to display message activity, right? But there was no there was no intent which was coming back from this activity, right? In some cases you might want to go from one activity to another activity and then come back to the same activity. In such cases you will be using start activity for result, right? Now you can also use Jobscheduler class. Like I said, we will be discussing some news. So there is this new addition to Android T since Android 5.0, that is API level 21, wherein you can use this new class. For earlier Android versions, you can start a service by passing an intent to start a service. But now you can, since Android 5.0, you can also use Jobscheduler, right? Like for example, if you want to start a service, you can use this start service method as well, right? You can bind the service by passing an intent to bind service. You can initiate a broadcast by passing an intent to methods such as send broadcast, send ordered broadcast. So if you want to pass in broadcast through an intent, you prepare an intent object and then use this method send broadcast. Similar to this method start activity, you have send broadcast, send ordered broadcast, and several other methods that are available for you to start sending broadcasts in the shape of an intent. You can perform a query to content provider by calling query on a content resolver. So content resolver is a class which lets you make objects which you can call or which you can set on an app which has got a lot of data with it, and then you can call query method to resolve or to get the data from these apps, right? Like I said earlier, I keep saying this time and again, we will be discussing all of this in our future lectures as and when it comes to the Android documentation in serial order, right? Subscribe to the channel and stay connected to the future videos that we are going to discuss the Android developer docs in. See you, take care, bye bye.